Today we are going to be reading Roar the Ganges, and this reading is extra special because we will be reading the last chapter. We've read it through all the chapters so far. All we have to do is read this one more. There's also an afterword and more information and about the author, which we'll read as well. But this last chapter is called The Onward Journey. As I walked out of the dining hall after lunch, I saw Swami Sudhananda standing near the office door. He beckoned me with a wave of his hand and went inside. By the time I arrived, he had already returned to the pile of papers on his cluttered desk. He looked up and said with a sense of urgency that our guru, Swami Dayananda, wanted to see me before he left. That is, right now. Being summoned like that made me feel oddly like a schoolboy ordered to the principal's office. I knocked at the door of Swami Dayananda's cottage. No answer. After a few minutes I knocked again, and I wondered if I should come back later. Then a muffled voice from within asked me to wait. I stood quietly, feeling a bit anxious, wondering why I had been called. Finally, he opened the door to let me in and walked towards his chair without saying a word. I touched his feet and sat on the floor before him. When you go back to the States, he said, you are likely to have some difficulties being understood as a sannyasi, a renunciate, by the local folk. You knew this very well from the beginning. Here in India, there is no problem. Everyone knows what a sannyasi is. Most people here respect those committed to a life of renunciation. But back in the States, few people will understand. Someone who gives up their job and takes to a life of contemplation is likely to be considered a lazy or worthless fellow. Also, these robes will appear strange. Westerners are familiar with religious habits worn by Christian monks and nuns, but they might think you are wearing an orange bedsheet. Swami Dayananda picked up an orange t-shirt from the table and handed it to me. You don't have to wear these robes at all times. You can wear pants and shirt when you travel. You will have to learn how to adapt some of our traditions to life in the West. Thank you, Swamiji, I said, taking the shirt. But how do I know which traditions to follow and which to modify? There is no rule, nor are there any precedents for you to follow. You will have to discover for yourself what is appropriate. It's more important to hold firm to the spirit of sannyasa, renunciation, than to rigidly adhere to the customs of Indian sannyasis. You just have to maintain your life of renunciation and remain dedicated to spiritual pursuits alone. Swami Dayananda finished his brief lecture and dismissed me without further discussion. I left his cottage feeling somewhat unsettled. I knew I would encounter some difficulties in adjusting to this new lifestyle. I did not particularly look forward to the complications of adapting to life in the West. I was happy to have a few more weeks in India before returning to the US and confronting these issues. I sat on a bench, mentally replaying my conversation with Swami Dayananda, when Swami Prakash suddenly appeared over my shoulder. He inquired, "Is everything quite all right?" "Yes, of course," I answered. "Why do you ask?" He sat beside me and said, "You are looking rather gloomy, isn't it?" "I am accustomed to seeing you look bright and cheerful." I told him my concerns about returning to America. After a few moments, he asked, "What about your parents? What will they say when they learn you have become a sannyasi?" "I discussed all this with them months ago," I replied. "They received the news surprisingly well. My father thinks I am doing something worthwhile with my life. My mother was happy too, but she probably wishes I could get married and raise a family instead. She wants grandchildren." Swami Prakash asked, "How is it your parents are so accepting of you becoming a Swami, a Hindu monk?" I presumed American parents would be quite upset. "At first they did not understand," I explained. "It took a long time. When I began my spiritual pursuit, they didn't know anything about Vedanta or Swamis. They found all this quite strange. They probably assumed it was a passing fascination that I would soon outgrow. But as my involvement grew stronger, they became concerned." I continued, "Swami Dayananda once came to my parents' hometown to give a series of public lectures. I made a special trip to go there so I could bring my parents to meet him and listen to his teachings. They didn't understand everything he taught, but they later recognized that he was a teacher worthy of respect. Years later, when they visited me at the Pennsylvania ashram and saw the work I was doing as manager, they seemed rather pleased. Little by little, their concerns faded." Then Swami Prakash asked, "What will they feel when they see you dressed in these saffron robes?" Hello, AJ. "They will not see me dressed like this, at least not very soon." "What?" he said in dismay. "You will not be wearing these robes?" "Not when I visit my parents," I answered. "How can you even think that?" he said indignantly. "Wearing these robes is a sacred duty for every sadhu." I was surprised by the strength of his reaction. I had expected to encounter non-acceptance when I got back to the United States, but I never expected to encounter it here in India. I showed him the orange shirt that Swami Dayananda had just given me and said, "Is it not the color that has symbolic importance rather than the style of the dress? Wearing a dhoti and upper cloth is an Indian custom, but sannyasis can wear anything, even if it's only a kaupina, underwear, as long as it's saffron in color. Is it not so?" Swami Prakash did not answer immediately. Then he explained how difficult it is for those immersed in this tradition to accept any changes to their ancient customs. He had never been outside India, and I found it hard to imagine cultures totally different from his own. He found it hard to imagine cultures totally different from his own. He agreed that some changes are inevitable when this tradition takes root outside its land of origin. But in his heart, he still seemed to disapprove. Alright, we'll save ourselves for the last section of this last chapter of this book and pause our reading there for now. But later on we will continue reading this and finish the book. So thank you for listening.